Imagine a country where women walked freely in miniskirts through bustling capital streets, where universities hummed with debate, jazz clubs filled with smoke and laughter, and a king dreamed of turning his ancient nation into the envy of the modern world. A country that hosted international film festivals, sent athletes to the Olympics, and signed trade deals with the West. This was Iran, not a century ago, but within living memory. And then, in the space of a single year, it was gone. 1979. The word alone carries weight. In the span of 12 months, one of the Middle East's most modernized nations underwent a transformation so sudden, so total, that historians still struggle to fully explain it. A revolution swept away a monarchy, but what replaced it was something the world had never quite seen before: a theocratic republic built not on the ruins of failure, but on the wreckage of something that had been, in many ways, thriving. To understand how Iran fell, you first have to understand how high it had climbed. In 1963, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi launched what he called the White Revolution, a sweeping modernization program that gave women the right to vote, broke up feudal land holdings, and sent a literacy corps into rural villages. Iran's oil revenues were pouring into highways, hospitals, and steel mills. By the mid-1970s, Iran had the fifth largest military in the world. The CIA considered it a pillar of stability in a volatile region. Western governments lined up to sell Tehran fighter jets, nuclear reactors, and surveillance technology. But beneath the glittering surface, something was rotting. The Shah's secret police, SHABNAM, ran a network of informants and torture chambers that silenced dissent with terrifying efficiency. Rapid modernization had torn millions of Iranians from their traditional roots, creating a population that felt alienated from both its past and its present. Wealth flooded in, but it pooled at the top. And in the holy city of Qom, a fierce, uncompromising cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini had been broadcasting a simple, devastating message from exile. The Shah was a puppet of America, and Islam was the answer. When the revolution came, it came fast with mass protests. The Shah fled in January 1979, carrying a box of Iranian soil. He would never return. Khomeini arrived at Tehran's Mehrabad airport on February 1st to a crowd of millions. Within weeks, firing squads were at work. The Islamic Republic of Iran was declared on April 1st, 1979, a date that would carry its own bitter irony. What followed was not just a change of government. It was a civilizational reversal. Alcohol was banned. Music was banned. Mixed-gender swimming was banned. Women were required to wear the hijab in public, not as a personal choice, but by force of law. Universities were purged in what the new government called a cultural revolution. Thousands of professors, judges, military officers, and civil servants were dismissed, imprisoned, or executed. Tens of thousands of educated Iranians, doctors, engineers, artists, packed their bags and left. The brain drain was staggering, and it has never fully stopped. Then came the hostage crisis. On November 4th, 1979, radical students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and seized 52 diplomats. They held them for 444 days. The world watched, stunned. Iran's relationship with the West, the relationship that had been the backbone of its modernization, shattered beyond repair. Economic sanctions began. Iran found itself increasingly isolated, increasingly defiant, and increasingly poor. And then came the war. In September 1980, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, sensing weakness in the revolutionary chaos, ordered his armies across Iran's border. What followed was 8 years of industrial slaughter. The Iran-Iraq War killed an estimated 500,000 people, perhaps more. Iran sent waves of young men, sometimes barely teenagers, into minefields. The war forged a generation of Iranians who had known nothing but revolution, sacrifice, and death. It also forged the institutions of the Islamic Republic in ways that would prove permanent. The Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, emerged from the war not merely as a military force, but as an economic empire, a political machine, and the true power behind the government. When Khomeini died in 1989, the streets of Tehran filled with mourners so frenzied that dozens were crushed to death. His successor, Ali Khamenei, lacked Khomeini's charisma but proved to be a far more durable political survivor. Over the following decades, Khamenei would consolidate power with quiet, ruthless patience, outmaneuvering reformers, manipulating elections, and building a system designed above all else to perpetuate itself. There were moments when change seemed possible. In 1997, a reformist cleric named Mohammad Khatami won the presidency with a landslide, 70% of the vote. Young Iranians, many of them born after the revolution, dared to hope. They talked of dialogue between civilizations. They pushed the edges of press freedom. For a few years, Tehran's cafes buzzed with something almost like optimism. Then the supreme leader moved. Newspapers were shut down. Student protesters were arrested. Reformist politicians were disqualified from future elections. The experiment ended not with a bang, but with the slow, suffocating pressure of a system that had learned exactly how to absorb and destroy hope. By the time Mahmoud Ahmadinejad rose to power in 2005, Iran had pivoted toward confrontation. His government accelerated the nuclear program, inflamed tensions with Israel, and sent weapons to Hezbollah, Hamas, and militias across the region. The international community responded with crushing sanctions. Iran's economy buckled. Inflation exploded. The rial, Iran's currency, lost more than 60% of its value in a single year. Ordinary Iranians paid the price. In 2009, the world caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the surface. When Ahmadinejad's disputed re-election sparked the Green Movement, millions of Iranians taking to the streets in the largest protests since the revolution itself, the government's response was merciless. The IRGC and Basij militia beat protesters in the streets. Opposition leaders were placed under house arrest, where they remain to this day. A young woman named Neda Agha-Sultan was shot dead, her final moments captured on a mobile phone and broadcast to the world. Iran's rulers had shown their hand. There would be no reform, only repression. The nuclear deal of 2015 offered a brief window, a moment when diplomacy, however fragile, seemed to hold. But in 2018, the United States withdrew under President Trump, reimposing sanctions that drove Iran's economy back to the edge of collapse. Hardliners used the failure of the deal to vindicate their worldview. The West could never be trusted. Iran needed only itself. And so the walls went up. Not just political walls, digital ones. Iran's rulers had watched the Arab Spring with horror. They had seen social media topple governments in Egypt and Tunisia. They had no intention of allowing the same tools inside their borders. What they built instead was one of the most sophisticated internet control systems on the planet. The National Information Network, called SHABNAM, is Iran's parallel internet, a domestic intranet designed to function even if the global web is cut off entirely. WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all blocked. VPNs, widely used by ordinary Iranians to access the outside world, exist in a legal gray zone, tolerated until they aren't. During periods of unrest, the government simply turns the internet off. In November 2019, following fuel price protests, authorities shut down access for 5 days. Hundreds were killed. The darkness was designed to hide the killing. When Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, died in the custody of the morality police in September 2022, something broke open. The protests that followed were different from anything before. Young women burned their hijabs in the streets. The slogan was 3 words, Farsi words that echoed around the world: Zan, Zindagi, Azadi. For months, the uprising spread, from Tehran to Isfahan, from universities to oil fields. Protesters were not just asking for reform. They were rejecting the entire foundation of the Islamic Republic. The government's response followed a pattern 5 decades in the making. Arrests, beatings, executions, hundreds killed, tens of thousands detained. The internet throttled, cameras in the streets. And slowly, agonizingly, the uprising was crushed. Not because the people lost courage, but because a system that has spent 50 years building its walls, physical, legal, digital, is very hard to tear down from the inside. Today, Iran is a nation of 90 million people, young, educated, deeply frustrated. More than 60% of its population was born after the revolution. They have never known the country their parents describe with quiet longing. They live under an aging clerical establishment that controls the judiciary, the military, the media, and Increasingly, the internet. They watch the economy crumble around them. They see their peers in neighboring countries living lives that the revolution promised to liberate them from. Iran still sits at a geographic crossroads of civilization. Heir to one of the oldest cultures on Earth, a nation of poets and scientists and mathematicians who gave the world algebra and architecture and the game of chess. Its people carry that inheritance with a weight that is both burden and pride. The question the world is watching, the question Iranians themselves are living every single day, is whether that inheritance will ever again be free to breathe. 50 years is a long time. Long enough to raise a generation that knows nothing else. Long enough to build institutions that know how to survive. Long enough for a revolution to convince itself it is permanent. But history has a longer memory than any regime. And across Iran, in the whispered conversations of university students, in the encrypted messages sent through VPNs, in the quiet fury of women who remember what it felt like to walk uncovered in the sun, something refuses to be fully extinguished. Whether that ember becomes a fire again, whether Iran reclaims the future it once almost had, that story is still being written by the people the regime thought it had already silenced.